We're going live. It's 6:39, so we have a little bit of time before we actually start. This is Shawn, Multi-Ethnicity, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Excuse me for misspelling the word class. It's Multi-Ethnicity class, and I look forward to you coming in. Anyhow, we have a bunch of things to talk about tonight. We're actually heading down the real path. Class is formally underway, and we have a couple things, some house cleaning tips to think about as we go into the night. Let me just say that before I begin, that I've been having all kinds of Wi-Fi problems tonight, so I'm using the OBS system to do the live stream, which comes through YouTube. So what I'll do is, if you get cut off, I will continue to record it, and I will place it into the Blackboard as a link, and you can continue to watch it all the same. But you know, I just like yourself, I'm very interested in. Oh, by the way, before I start, I just want to say that there's a couple new students who joined us over the weekend, and I'd like to welcome them in as well. We have a small class. I think we're up to 11 people, which means we can have nice, intimate conversations. Speaking of which, I'd like for you to go ahead and say hello in your chat. But if the chat should turn off, I'd like for you to send me a text message if you would like to ask a question or contribute a statement or a comment. The phone number is 305-755-2579. Hey Megan, thanks for joining me, and I think we friended on Facebook or something like that. But in any case, it's nice to have you this evening. I hope you're enjoying the class or what have you. Good to see you. Good evening. Also, along those lines, there it is. That's the go ahead if you want to text on there. Also, some real life events have been taking place, and I want to pay attention to that. I want to make sure everyone feels welcomed here, because it's not always welcoming out in the real world, and some of it has to do with ethnicity, some of it has to do with social class, sometimes gender, a whole myriad of things. I'm trying to figure out how to get the lighting right. Let me see if I can change. Oh Lord. Oh, I definitely know it. Oh, that's a little bit better. That's a little bit better. Anyway, who else do we have in here? We have Megan. Who else is on here tonight? Oh, you're welcome, Megan. It's my pleasure. I was going to say that if we cut out, I will continue to record, and then we can place it tonight. I noticed that, and this is not it's not a slam or anything. I noticed that no one submitted their homework for yesterday, which I'll go ahead and take the heat, and I'll take the blame for that. Evidently there was some kind of breakdown in the communication system, which is fine. But inside that Blackboard, what I'm going to do, well, for those of you who don't have the syllabus, I guess that might be the problem, is that if you go into the course messages, I sent it as an attachment to everyone. So it's already there. Hey Stephanie, good afternoon. Nice to see you again, Stephanie. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to link in this video. If we get cut off, I'll just keep talking, because it's so distracting to get. Yeah, I misspell everything. You see what I did with class up there. What was I saying? So, in any case, I'll put all the links in there that you need for this video, Who Am I, which was a part of what we should have been considering for the class exercise over the weekend, and then the Who Am I lecture, which was last week. And I'd like for you to, if you didn't watch those, go ahead and watch those, because in the Who Am I lecture, the 54-minute one, that's actually the most important day of the whole semester, because that's the one where I get to frame all the social theories that I use to make sense out of issues pertaining to inequality and ethnicity and issues of that type. So let's let a couple more people come in. We have 3 right now, but I'd like to have more before we begin. In any case, how was your weekend? Did anyone have a really nice weekend? Anything special take place? Stephanie, Megan? I'm always itching my nose, and my nose doesn't even itch. I don't know what it is. I guess it's a nervous twitch or something like that. But in any case, I'm having. Oh, by the way, just want you all to know that. Oh God, this is ridiculous. Now my eye itches. I just want you all to know that I am having a great time this semester. I'm getting more and more comfortable with the video presentations. But I'd like to meet some of you, and so as the semester progresses, I would like to maybe Zoom with any of you for about 10 minutes just to introduce ourselves and to discuss your upcoming assignments. Okay, nice. All right, Megan, all good here. I spoke to the chair of the department down at Inter-American, the social sciences department, And he and I agree that perhaps I have too many assignments for such a short term, so I'm going to make some modifications along the way. All right, I'm not sure exactly what the modification is going to be, but I'm going to make it, and it's going to be to your favor. But I will say this, is that the assignment that was due yesterday, which was Sunday the 7th, I'm going to give you the full permission to submit it tomorrow as an attachment to a course message. All right. If you don't use the course message, I will permit you to send it as an attachment to my HopeWorks email, which is this, Shawn.hopeworks@gmail.com. So as long as you send it as an attachment, I'm not going to penalize anybody for being late or what have you, because obviously the way I look at things, if you look at that, who am I look at situations as structural, right? Which means that somewhere the patterns that underlie our behavior somehow got broken. And I don't know if it was a communication breakdown, I don't know if it was a structural breakdown, maybe you all work full time, but I imagine that. Good question. It's just like Megan, her question was, how do I attach it to the course message? Well, if you go into Course Messenger, which I'm not sure how you do it compared to how I do it, into messages, and let's just say you're going to send me an email. You send me an email just like any other email, and you put in the subject line, you put in multi-ethnicity, the 5 most important issues pertaining to ethnicity, right? And then you just send it in as an attachment like you would an email. It's the same. And if you can't figure out how to do it within Blackboard, you can send it to my Shawn.hopeworks@gmail.com as an attachment, and I'll accept it that way too. You know, I'm getting better at technology, but I haven't figured out how to do all the Blackboard stuff. Usually when we teach a class, the class is already set up and we manage it. But it's been so long since I've actually set up drop boxes and set up all the point systems and all that kind of stuff that it's just as easy for me to go ahead and have you do it as an attachment. And then I'll go ahead and record it in my grade book, and then I'll give you feedback along the way. Now, I do have to say that right now I'm writing that book. For example, yesterday, okay, you can email me, and Megan, if it doesn't work, remember, you can always text me because I will respond to text message. I did take yesterday off. I took yesterday off for the fact that, I misspell everything, you don't have to worry about that. I had to take yesterday off from communication. I'm getting about 100 to 150 text messages and emails every single day, and I have to write this book. It's going to be about 125 pages by Friday. I did write 25 yesterday. I'm going to probably write 25 more tonight after class ends. And by the way, the reason I can write 25 pages just sitting down is simply for the fact that that little video that I showed you, the 2-minute video on how to write a great paper, that's how I do it. I can come up with an idea, I brainstorm it, I throw it down, I connect it, I diagram it, I outline it. When I get done, the outline will write the paper for me. And once you practice that a few times, once you own it, it becomes very easy to, in fact, write a paper. Excuse me. Let me just say that one of the changes I want to make this time around, so the paper that's due yesterday is going to be due tomorrow by 11:59 p.m. And I know Megan, you and Stephanie are right on top of everything, and I really appreciate that. Hope everyone else tunes in. If not, they can watch the video. But the one thing I want to do, I'm going to make a little change for Sunday's assignment, which is going to be the 14th. All right. What I'm going to have you do. Oh no, good question, Megan. Her question was, do you have a list of the top 5 issues, or do we find it ourselves? Because I found different lists of top issues in the U.S. You find it, all right? And you don't even have to look it up. You know, it could be something intuitive in your mind. You know, you might say race relations, race and education, ethnicity, building a wall. You might say, you know, something like insourcing or outsourcing, or global economics and the impact on xenophobia within society. You know, you choose it. It could be whatever you think is the most important 5. It could be the history of, you know, exploitation of minority workers. It could be, you know, whatever. It could be, you know, allowing illegal immigrants to work, knowingly work in, you know, industries that require low skills and actually less than minimum wage. I mean, those are pretty big issues. If you want to get into, you know, illegal immigration and crime, you can do something like that. However, you need to be very careful, because when I read those kind of papers, you're welcome, I always try to take a look at, are they doing an analytical paper or an opinion paper? Because an opinion paper is a lot different than an analytical paper. If you come in and saying, illegal immigrants and engage in a whole lot more violent crime than domestic Americans born here, you're going to have a real problem, because it statistically is untrue. And the evidence is written by Ramiro Martinez, who was a colleague of mine at Ohio State in grad school, but he worked at the University or FIU, and now he's up at Northeastern, and he's a world-renowned researcher on Latinos and homicide, and illegal immigration is one of his things. Because if you think about it, an illegal immigrant's trying to stay under the radar as much as they can. They're not trying to bring attention to themselves, because they're not trying to get deported. So under those circumstances, they tend to congregate together, and they may engage in deviant behavior within the group, but they tend not to engage in the murder that gets so pronounced on the news. Now, I'm not saying that those cases don't happen, and when they do happen, they should be punished like anybody else. No one's saying that. But what I'm saying is that the rate of engagement, the rate of offending, is different than what the media says. Because when we take a look at the media, I'm going to come back to the assignment, you know how I might just go. But when it comes to the media does for us a very powerful thing, and that is, it helps us to construct a dominant perspective, an ideology, a fixed system of thinking about issues, right? And so when we look at the media is here to promote for us a common sense, right? So if you take the media plus politicians supporting the evidence that the media projects, and vice versa, and you have word of mouth, which is where everyday people, they share their experiences or their perceived experiences with one another, thereby verifying what's already out there. And when word of mouth overlaps with political banter and it overlaps with media representations, then you have an ideology, right, which is a fixed set of beliefs to define the reason why things happen, a belief as to what happens. But oftentimes those aren't empirical truths, right? So if we take a look at what is really the pattern behind it, it might be completely different than what common sense says. So as far as the reason why, you're welcome, the reason why foster care, education, homelessness, yeah, that's perfect, Megan, exactly. Ethnicity and homelessness, and it could be localized, right? Because, if you go to South Dakota, you're not going to have the same issues because of such a homogeneous type of population as you would in, say, New York City or in Miami or San Antonio or someplace like Los Angeles. So you'd want to do some specification, but something along those lines, perfect. Ethnicity and education is great. Foster care, I wouldn't even thought of that. So yeah, I think that's a great one. And as far as the way we're approaching this in terms of ethnicity being a shared history, then you can even put race in if you define race as a shared history. Because that's a lot different than saying, like we talked about last week, a biological characteristic. So we'll go in that direction. You build that argument, I can go with that. So in that case, race and foster care and all those kind of issues are perfectly pertinent. Now what I want to do, like I think for yesterday, what you had to do is list the five most important issues pertaining to ethnicity in American society. And obviously in Miami it's a different world because we have a broad spectrum of ethnicity and What's up with my nose? I don't understand. My nose is always itching. They say if you well, that's not going to happen, but they say if your nose itches, you're going to kiss a fool. If your palm itches, you're going to come into money. I got to have someone to kiss, So I'm sitting here. That's not likely to happen unless I, kiss myself. Maybe then there's a little bit of foolishness there. I'm not sure. But in any case, what I want you to do for this upcoming week, all right, for Sunday, the 14th, I want you to take a movie, a real-life movie, not made for Hollywood, a real-life movie that pertains to ethnicity, all right, and a particular issue pertaining to ethnicity. And then what I want you to do is I want you to take that theme, and I want you to take one of the theories that I had you look up, either conflict theory, functionalism, or symbolic interactionism, right? Again, conflict theory, Karl Marx, functionalism, which is Emile Durkheim, and symbolic interaction, which is like George Herbert Mead and people like that. Take one of those theories and analyze that movie based upon that theory. And it should be between 1 to 2 pages, right? Nothing terribly complicated. All right, but you'll do something like that. Okay, Megan, that's another great question. As far as sources for this particular assignment, I don't want to put it on video, if I say, Wikipedia. But Wikipedia will give you a thumbnail. And within that thumbnail, at the bottom, there are references. What I'd have you do is go ahead and click on a couple of those references and read through the abstracts. And maybe if one of them really catches your eye, you just go ahead and read through the whole thing, right? So there aren't really any restrictions on this particular one. APA style is nice, double-spaced, all the title and references, all that's fine. But what I'm more interested in at this point, okay, God, I'm going to put this on video. I hope my boss doesn't watch this. All right, I'm not for plagiarism. Right? I want everyone to have their original thought. But when we're talking about APA formatting, when we're talking about citations and getting all that stuff right, that's important. However, in my opinion, the way I look at it is, I want your content to be right. I want you to demonstrate to me some original thought. I want you to organize your ideas. And I want it to be, and I want you to use that, you're welcome, that structure where you have a introduction and you put it in bold, write it right into the paper. Introduction, write your introduction. Background to the topic. What are the trends? What's the history of the topic? What does the literature say about that particular topic? Whatever angle you take as a background is fine, but that's framing. That's going to frame the rest of your paper, right? Then your theory, conflict theory, functionalism, or is it symbolic interaction? Write your little section, put the word theory on there. Then you're going to have data. What kind of data are you going to have to support or refute the theory? Then your analysis, put the analysis section there. And what you do with the analysis is you use that data to tie back and discuss the theory as it applies to your topic. Then finally you draw conclusions. In this particular paper, it should be about 2 pages long. And if you do that, you're going to be in magnificent shape. All right, so, and I see that it looks like it's you, me, and you, Megan, and Stephanie, and myself. I see 2 viewers, and I guess it's just the 3 of us, which I'm perfectly okay with. All right, and it can be the 3 of us. Now, as I take a look at common sense, right, and where it's derived from, we can see common sense in everyday life. Common sense, what it's used for, is the function of common sense is to allow us to adapt to familiar environments, an environment in which we already know the expectations and we know what the guiding rules and regulations are, the norms. So the reason we use common sense is so we can fit in, right? And what we find is that so often our common sense is a reflection of our word of mouth, which is our experience. Yes, that's right, Megan. You're going to use in the second paper an example from the movie to explain the issue. Exactly. And then you're going to build around it. One thing you don't do, now that we're talking about that, and I'm going to come back to common sense here in a second. One thing you don't do is don't start your paper talking about the movie and don't talk about the scene. Go back and watch that little video again and see how I wrote the conceptual introduction for a paper, right? So what I want is a conceptual introduction. You might want to say something like this, all right? You might want to say something like this. And this would be perfectly acceptable. I can't think of the author. Let's just say, you're welcome. Marx argued that the method of entrance into society will impact life chances for future generations. Period. Subsequently, comma, those who entered a society voluntarily tend to have better life chances than those who are coerced or those who enter involuntarily. Period. And you'll talk about those later. The distribution of, and let's say you were going to talk about, I don't know, educational inequality. All right? Those who entered into society through coerced mechanisms tend to have lower aggregate levels of education than those who come in voluntarily. And the ones who would be in the middle came in involuntarily. And then you're going to define what that is. Because voluntary entry into a society means you came on your own volition. You wanted to come, or you were recruited to come. And if that's the reason you came, then it's very likely that you're going to find it very easy to assimilate into society. All right? But if you came in involuntarily, which is different, you come in because the conditions in your home country are so bad that you leave the home country to come here so that you can salvage and have a decent way of life. For example, with the uproar in Venezuela right now, people are coming here because of the turmoil there. Or you go back to the Vietnam War, or you go back to Laos, and you go back to, it doesn't matter. Conditions are so bad at times. Or some persons who come from depressed areas of Mexico, they want to come here so that they can make money to send money back. It's not that they necessarily want to come here, but it provides them with an opportunity. So it's not voluntary, it's involuntary, but it's a choice that is made to get away from those conditions. Versus coerce, right? Coerce are people who were forced to enter into society. So, for example, in the United States, there are two groups that were coerced: African Americans and Native Americans. And if you take a look at the distribution of educational outcomes, the distribution of income outcomes, right? If you go back historically, you will find that those who were coerced economically are more disadvantaged than those who came in voluntarily, right? So you have, say, for example, the professional classes that come in from Asia, India, Asia, or China, Asia, or Japan, or what have you. Educated elite, and Cuba too, right, back in the late 1950s, those persons who came in as educated elite came in and they were able to get nice professional jobs, and therefore their income was higher. Voluntary entry. Those who came in involuntarily, for example, may have come in and found their way and ultimately established a decent lifestyle or quality of life. But those who are coerced, see, the reason why those who are coerced when they come into a society have lower levels of quality of life over time, and it's not just quality of life, it's income inequality, racial inequality, educational inequality, wealth inequality. It even plays itself out in health inequality, right? Even in the way in which we live and the way in which we die has something to do with the method of entry for entire groups, right? And you can look at that through conflict theory, probably through conflict theory. And here's the reason why. Because when a group comes in coerced, those who have the power in that society at that point in time have to create the definitions for the coercion. So anytime there's a rivalry, or any time in which there is a group of people who are trying to formally exploit another group of people, they have to define the group that's being exploited as somehow being subhuman. And they tend to use things like eugenics. They tend to use things like, Sir Francis Galton, who said that there's a distribution of physical attributes that distribute us into the population. We might use social Darwinism, the survival of the fittest, natural selection, which, by the way, is really a trap, isn't it? Because here's how it works. If people are naturally selected to survive, and it's survival of the fittest, then those who are most fit have survived. It's tautological, right? It's a circular type of reasoning. So therefore, those who are poor, those who end up on the bottom levels, since they all have access to education, they weren't fit enough to rise up. So their natural selection is to be there. Now, when you add in things, the third component of social Darwinism is progression, right? There's always this assumption that we go from lower forms to higher forms in a linear progression, from less civilized to more civilized, from primitive to civilized. And what has happened historically is that when people come in as coerced, by definition, they are defined as being quote-unquote inferior, right? So when we take a look at the use of social Darwinism back in the 1800s, it was specifically utilized to define African Americans as somehow inferior to the property landowners, and it carried on a legacy, right? And then in the South, and you can read about it in Dear Mama, in the South, Mexicans were also defined as being inferior, and therefore they were lynched as well as African Americans during the late part of 1800s, early part of the 1900s. Why? Because the stereotype said that this group was more of a threat. So what we do is, as a group who have power, is we define those who have less power as a threat. And then we create the stereotypes and the controlling images that confirm that it's a threat. And then we allow politicians and we allow the media to double amplify the threat. It's called the dramatization of evil. So once you create an evil designation and you dramatize it, right? And there's another thing called status degradation ceremonies. Once you find the person that occupies that status, and you continually denigrate that group, and you degrade that group, then it becomes a ceremonial behavior to denigrate that group. So even if you take a look at the media today, who are the people who occupy the positions of power in the movies or on TV or wherever, and who's the ones that are treated as a threat? It's the same groups that we go back to the 1800s, and the distribution hasn't changed once in 160, 170 years. Why? Because it gets built into the social fabric, the common sense fabric, and here's the beauty. But it's ugly. The beauty is that historically, once we start to believe that these cultural beliefs are true, they become systems of division, right? Once we create a common sense perspective that this group is a threat to this group, then we create a social boundary that is arbitrary. And it's typically arbitrary because those who have power and wealth had the authority to make those definitions stick. And what do you get? What you get is that those persons who were coerced had to be defined as inferior, because if they were defined as equal, then you couldn't exploit that group for profits, right? And the more distant they are in terms of skin color from those who are powerful, the more difficult it is to assimilate, right? So when we take a look at the history of race and ethnicity, and it doesn't matter if it's the United States, it doesn't matter where it is, because slave systems have operated all around the world over historical time, and the process has always been the same, right? Nazi Germany used the same kind of philosophy. Joseph Stalin, right, used the same philosophy. Mao Zedong used the same philosophy. Pol Pot in Mongolia, they all use the same philosophy. You have a group of people who are deemed as a threat, you define them as a threat, media reconfirms it, then the politicians say they're a threat, then we treat them as a threat, and then the police act as if they're a threat. Next thing you know, by definition, they're a threat. And then what do you have? You have genocide, right? Ethnic genocide is based upon the same process. So what does that have to do with the raining outside? Man, I didn't mean to go there. I'm just trying to say, watch a movie and submit it, analyze it using one of those three theories. However, the one thing that is really bothersome to me, having been raised in an African American family, right? Having been raised in a neighborhood that was ethnically diverse, African American, Puerto Rican, Mexican, white. We all got along like the Rainbow Coalition because of the fact that we were all part of the same neighborhood. Our fear wasn't who was in the neighborhood. Our fear was the threat that came from outside the neighborhood, and oftentimes the threat that came from within our home. So us poor kids would congregate together, and we saw each other as one. So at that level, in terms of social class, those ethnic backgrounds were broken. However, ironically, is that occasionally the stereotypes pertaining to race and ethnicity would play themselves out. And since my mother, I was raised by Mama Green, who was an African American woman from Mississippi and Arkansas. Her daughter's name was Irma Jean, and her son's name was Leo, and I used to call him Guy. He was my brother. And Irma Jean rented the upstairs for my mother. And when she first moved in, even though us kids played together, when we first moved into that house in 1968. Oh, jeez, so old. So we moved in 1968. The neighborhood immediately took up a petition to have Irma Jean removed from the neighborhood. But as it turned out, Irma Jean had a bigger-than-life personality, so as she would not back down, and she did not allow them to destroy the way she saw herself, and she would always say hello. She would invite people over for her barbecue and to get liquored up. Oh my God. My neighborhood was based upon liquor, all right? So back in the 60s and the 70s, it was alcohol heaven back in those days. And drugs, oh man. We can talk about the 60s and the 70s at a later time. Well, I guess I'll be doing it because no one's talking to me. I'm talking to myself. But in any case, people started learning who she was, and then next thing you know, they love her. And they knew Mama Green because she worked at the high school where all the kids from the neighborhood went to school. And they loved her because she would protect them from kids from other neighborhoods beating them up. She was big. She had these huge hands. And if someone would fight with her, she could take them out. And the reason was because she was a bare-knuckle boxer back in the 1920s. In any case. So we were coalesced by social class. But the stereotypes sometimes played themselves out interpersonally. But when it came down to us being threatened by Weiler Homes, which was at the time in the mid-late 70s, they were infiltrated by the Detroit boys who migrated down from Detroit, and we became like neighborhood rivals. So it wasn't so much about ethnicity as it was about neighborhood. But in any case, it was kind of complicated. The stereotypes would creep in, but for the most part, we were coalesced based upon social class and neighborhood. Right? So I get to see all these kind of things. And it was dangerous, but it wasn't dangerous because of the ethnic divide or the racial divide. It was uh-oh, someone's calling me, I'm sorry. Scam likely. You tired of scams. A lot of scams out there. But in any case, the conflict came from the fact that there were scarce resources, and oftentimes there was a lot of anger tied to the fact that we're working hard, but we can't seem to make our way. So as we try to work hard and make our way, at some point someone has to become the enemy. And then it was always internalized. Because if you watch, oh my gosh, I can't believe, okay. Under conflict theory, there's a position called internal colonization. Right? What internal colonization is, it means within neighborhoods, within a city, there are pockets where they are more of a colony than they are a neighborhood. And as a colony, what happens is that the homes are controlled by those outside the neighborhood that make you pay rent to them. The businesses are owned by outsiders from the neighborhood. In other words, the wealthy landowners own the neighborhood, but the people who live there have to rent to them, right? And in these little colonies of exploitation, those persons who live in the colony, regard one another as the enemy rather than the person that's controlling the system, right? So what happens is that the Crips don't like the Bloods don't like the Crips, you know, the people on Weiler Homes don't like the people over on Facet Street, and then what happens is we square off, and as we square off and we become enemies of one another, what's really happening is people who are similarly situated look at each other as the enemy, and within those colonies, they kill off one another. So when the colonized kill the colonizer no longer has to have a hand in it, right? So when you build that kind of system, right, you'll see that ethnicity becomes a stereotypical perspective, but when it becomes internalized as a controlling image, and we as a control believe that these images are true, and I see a brother like myself as the enemy rather than as someone who is like me, then all of a sudden something magical happens, and that is we see each other as enemy and the target of our own aggression. Which some people say internal colonization in the mind is based upon this idea that us who are internally colonized physically within a community, we internalize it in our mind and we become colonized here. And we believe those stereotypes are real, such that our greatest enemy is actually the person that is most like us, which is a dynamic part of violent crime in America. So what does that have to do with anything? So what that has to do with this. Yesterday, I was on the bus. You know, I don't have a car, I ride the bus. And I noticed that there was racial antagonism on the bus, and there was a man who said, you know what, I'm trying to sue America, who's going to sign this petition? You know, everyone's like, yeah, whatever. And of course, he identified me, are you going to sign it? And, you know, some things were said. And next thing you know, some guy in the back said, man, why don't you sit down, this kind of thing, it's ridiculous. He said, I have the right to protest my exploitation, and I want some people to sign, and other people are saying, hey, there's other ways to do it, and things are getting stirred up, and then they're back there getting ready to square off and fight. The guy goes, why don't you get off the bus with me? We'll get off on this stop over here on, what is it, US 1 and, 252nd Street down in Homestead. He's like, yeah, man, I'll get off with it. And, you know, they're going at it back and forth. Now they're enemies of one another, even though they occupy the same structural space in the system, right? So if we take a look at that Who Am I little video, where you have economics here, politics here, education, family, media institution, right? Shaping the opportunity structure, shaping the networks, shaping our small groups. What we find is that institutional structure creates the conditions, the context in which people interact, right? And when you throw in culture into that mix, the belief system that justifies the structure, then what you have is division within the community itself. So I'm watching these two guys get ready to square off, and I'm looking at them, I'm like, they probably live within 10 blocks of each other. They probably have relatively the same income, probably similar types of education, etc. But they're looking at each other as an enemy when in fact they should not be enemies at all because they share the same social position. I'm like, man, thinking about it like this. I'm doing my Shigaraki from My Hero Academia. I'm thinking about my kids, and I'm watching, and I go do my thing, and I get back on the bus, and we're heading north, and the next thing you know, this one guy, I think he was Hispanic, he's in an argument with a lady who has a baby, and they're about ready to square off. And I'm like, I've ridden the bus for years. I've only seen one strange situation of that type in 7 years. Then I see it twice, and I go to the bus stop, I'm seeing it at the bus stop, and I see it with people talking, and my printer's talking to me. I don't know what's going on in here. But anyhow, I'm starting to see us come apart at the fray, right? In these margins, with these protests around the United States, right? Yesterday, there were 650 protests in 650 cities, right? And I'm looking, and I'm watching how the media portrays it. The media portrays it as riots, sometimes protests, but what if they regard it as a rebellion or a revolution, right? If they called it a rebellion or a revolution, then that would certainly paint the picture that there's some rationality behind this. It would say that historically this group of people, and we're talking about African Americans in this particular instance, has a shared history. And that shared history culminates when it is clear, and I've seen the video, I thought it was pretty clear that it was homicide, right? It was horrible. I mean, it was injustifiable. And so I take a look at it and I say, okay, I see this. The protests come from the shared history of these persons who have been prosecuted, what have you, wrongly. Now, there's a lot of empirical questions involved with police brutality, excessive force, and the numbers are really much more complicated than what is portrayed. But in this instance, it reinforced the history of experience. So when persons come out and protest, they're protesting a history of experience. So we might say it's rioting, and if we say it's rioting, then what that means is people have lost emotional control and they're going to engage in chaos, right? Versus saying it's a rebellion. If it's a rebellion, then it's shared history acting out. The wording is going to influence the way in which we use our common sense to define what we see. Now, what I see is conflict. My friend, a former student of mine, as a matter of fact, from Sullivan University up in Louisville, Kentucky, he had 3 of his cousins get murdered last week. They're all African-American men. They all got murdered during the protests in Louisville, Kentucky by other African-American men. And he's broken. He's distraught. So we take a look at this, and we see the complication in the overlap between history, structure, culture, and the reinforcement of stereotypes through the media. Right? It becomes really complicated because when you have a system, a historical system, that looks at such expression as a riot, right? As something that is, what did I say? Not thought out. And then you threaten to bring in the military. And look, it's not just Trump, okay? This is a historical thing that's happened in other countries, it's happened here. But he did, in fact, say, you know what, we're going to bury this by using military force. But what that does is it reinforces this idea that it is an out of control, and it is. I mean, there's threat. There's definitely threat there. But what it signifies is enemies of the state, right? And so let's take a look at enemy of the state. When we take a look at ethnicity, right, historically, we're talking about method of entrance and these type of issues, right? When we take a look at the history of social control, the history is right there. All we're doing is reproducing a history that goes all the way back to the 1830s. And what do I mean by that? When the first police force in the United States was created under the Sir Robert Peel model in England, right in Boston, Philadelphia, New York. If you recall, the Irish, what is my printer doing? It's talking to me. So, when the Irish come to America, you got to remember they came in involuntarily. They had the Great Potato Famine taking place back in Ireland. And what happened was the men moved to the United States, the women were left behind, so the men came here to try to find a job. But where did they move? They moved into Boston, downtown. They moved into downtown New York and downtown Philadelphia. Well, the jobs that were available, the people who already lived there weren't trying to give up their jobs. So here you have this group of poor men, disproportionately, single men, who were drinkers coming into the urban areas, and they were regarded as a threat to, the WAPs who owned and controlled the property in that place and time. And because they were younger, they created what is called the bachelor subculture. And with the bachelor subculture, you have drinking, prostitution, gambling. You have a whole lot of masculine bravado. And then you have fighting, and you have gangs, and you have all that stuff. The movie Gangs in New York with Leonardo DiCaprio, very accurate portrayal of what took place in New York City at the 5 Points. When you had the Dead Rabbits, the Plug Uglies, and all those different groups, that was a version of what was taking place. And what was interesting is that the proliferation of the gangs at the time, they were tied to Tammany Square, which was the mayor who allowed them to continue to be engage in their behavior as long as they were paying him a fee. So the above ground had to be tied to the below ground for all the illicit behavior to take place. But at the same time, because the Irish were regarded as a threat to stability, the police were created. So the modern day police force was created in Boston to do what? Was to control the Irish, who were a threat to the system, right? So when we take a look at the police, the question becomes one of a theoretical position. There are 3 theories that we're going to predominantly use in this class. Conflict theory. Conflict theory makes the argument that the haves, the wealthy, own and control the social institutions and control and exploit the have-nots. In other words, the capitalist class that owns the mode of production, their interest is to control the proletariat so that the proletariat has to sell their wages at a depressed price so that the profits can be made for the capitalist class, right? And anybody who becomes a threat to that wage system becomes a threat to the economy. So therefore, the behavior that the Irish were engaging in New York City was a threat to the economic stability of New York and Boston. Now, it's the same now, right? So if we take a look at the looting, those who have power are saying, look, man, they're tearing down the businesses, which I'm not justifying that as correct. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is once it starts to hit the businesses, those who have wealth, they're going to want to squelch it. And if they have to do it with military might, they will do it. Why? It's historically based. So when the police department was created in the 1830s, they created a thing called the paddy wagon. And paddy being a derogatory term for those who are Irish. So we round up the Irish, we throw them in the wagon to take them to jail. To do what? To control them. Now, are you sitting back fearful of the Irish and their revolts? In the year 2020, are we really, almost 200 years later, are we really trying to control the Irish? Or have they assimilated into society? Greater assimilation, right? Because they have had a similarity to the dominant group in terms of like race and ethnicity, but they also came involuntarily, not coerced. So over time, they were able to assimilate into the workforce. And with that assimilation, rates of crime went down, quality of life went up, and now you cannot detect a person who is a threat because they're Irish, right? Because history has allowed it to be changed. But if you take a look at why did the police come into existence, it was to control an ethnic group that was regarded as a threat. Oh, what's up, Boone? Oh my God, I can't believe that. Okay, I have to sidetrack for a second, everybody. Megan and Stephanie, my buddy Booney just got on here. Let me just step back. Boone, this guy right here is Daniel Banning. He's been my best friend since we were 5 or 6 years old. We grew up together on the east side of Toledo. And this guy right here was undoubtedly the best baseball pitcher I've ever seen in my lifetime. He could throw a left-handed fastball about 92. He had a curveball that would break about 5 or 6 feet. He could throw a screwball, a rise ball, a drop ball. And we've been best friends now since, 71, 72. As a matter of fact, Booney, who's chilling at work right now, he actually was, as my best friend, he used to spend a lot of time with me over at Mama Green's. And the one beautiful thing that he could speak to, I'm sure, about Mama Green is that Mama Green didn't see race. She didn't see color. She saw, are you respectable? Are you trustworthy? She saw people, not hate. Am I right, Boone? So what she would look at is, what is the character of the person? And that's what I was taught. Never hate, never judge, right? So we move on from the Irish, and we head into the control of the Germans in the late the late 1800s, then the control of the Italians, right? And we take a look at at the same time, during the slave period, there were also the slave police who were hired to make sure that the slaves didn't try to revolt, and make sure that if they tried to escape, that you had a police force that was specifically designed to control that population. Oh, going back to Mama Green, she was pure love. But I'll tell you what, man, could she cook? Hey, Booney, could she cook? I'll wait for that, man. I'll tell you what, if you want some food, now this is an ethnicity thing, because Mama Green, she only cooked pure soul food from the South. So all I grew up with was soul food, and now it's regarded as, unhealthy or whatever. But let me tell you what, I don't eat fried chicken to this day. I won't eat it because it's not Mama Green's fried chicken. Her barbecue sauce, forget about it. She used to make home brew. She used to make homemade wine. She used to make elderberry wine. She made everything. So, and if you read his comments, he had Mama Green also, no matter where she went, she always had a switchblade on her named Lady May, and she always had her gun with her, which was named Black Beauty. And Black Beauty was the enforcer of the neighborhood. We never had to worry about being attacked. As a matter of fact, one time, Booney was with me. We were Mama Green, she's about 65. Well, no, at this time she was about 70. And she used to have a Dodge Palora, and she would drag race from her house to Rossford. And while we were drag racing, the guy beat her. There's a long curve, and he beat her. She pulled out her switchblade, tapped it on the window, and she said some prolific words and said, "MNF'er, if you ever do that again, come meet Lady May." And we're sitting in the front seat thinking, what did we just witness? But she was a colorful person, but she's also the same person that she took Booney in just like her own. She took in this guy named Jerry as her own. So the reason it's important to discuss is this. When we think that differences based upon race and ethnicity are inherently real in and of themselves because of what we've heard, what we've been told by the media, what we've been told by politicians, what our parents, what our friends have told us, what we're really doing is missing out on the opportunity, because there's such richness across these ethnic lines that one thing I learned from her, and I'm sure Booney did too, and a lot of the kids on our baseball team, we learned that you can love across race and class lines. As a matter of fact, when you do love others across race and class lines, you can create peace. And what we're seeing right now, I believe, is a media manufactured injustice, right? And the reason is why? Because if you create injustice in front of your eyes, you generate those ratings. And when you divide people within a society over things that may or may not be true, and it's your job, not mine, your job is to find empirical evidence to support or refute whatever it is you believe. All right? So, when we have these divisions, it is your job to look beyond what is on the surface. Because the thing about Mama Green, look, she raised me. She didn't have to raise me. My mother should have been able to raise me herself, right? It was her fault. She was pregnant to my father, who was he was a pianist. He had bipolar disorder. He was actually friends with Stevie Wonder. If you go back and look up the song "Ma Cherie Amour" by Stevie Wonder back in 1976, he wrote that song for him. And my dad, in the 60s and the 70s, he toured up in Detroit, which is where Motown is located, up in Detroit. So that's where Stevie originated. So they were friends back in those days. But he was never present. So it wasn't Mama Green's wasn't her position to have to raise me. But where she came from, as a person who grew up as granddaughter of a slave, whose mother grew up in Reconstruction in the South. What was interesting about those who are exploited as a group, they will extend their hands to people who are from outside that family. And a woman in 1973, Carol Stack, wrote a book called All Our Kin. And what she argued is that those who are poor, those who are minority, are much more likely to invite strangers in, to extend their network to them, to extend their resources to them so that they can survive. And what happens is, according to Carol Stack, and I think this is true, Booney, you can verify this, right? When you're poor, sometimes you don't have money. And when I don't have money, my friends will come to me and say, hey man, can you hook me up? Yeah, I got you. And then when I don't have money, they come back to me and say, man, we got you. Mama Green, she always had food, but there may be other resources she didn't have, so she might give out food and in return she'd get whatever she needed. We never hurt for anything even though we didn't have money. But what happened was, at least in our neighborhood in particular, like I was a very good speaker, Booney was a great athlete, there were some other people who were great protectors. Our godfather named Junior Gonzalez, who I wish he were listening here today, big shout out to you, Junior. Junior was like, we call him the godfather because he kept everyone in check. We had some gang-like tendencies because we had to protect ourselves, like I said, from violent homes. However, we all shared resources together. If you had this talent, you shared it. If you had this talent, you shared it. And what happens with ethnic exploitation is that it's a different type of tightly knit group, especially when it's a colonized group that is trying to survive with scarce resources, right? So when you take Chewy, that was his other nickname. So when you take these type of things and wrap them all together, and you come up with today's situation, what you're really looking at is the overlap between structural conditions, that is economic systems, education, etc., where we allow these systems to persist as they are without questioning them. But we hate one another at this micro level, at this interactionist level, this symbolic level. And we do so in a way, hey Boone, you notice I got my Buckeye hat on. And we do so in a way to denigrate others. Right? It is a structurated model where macro and micro forces affect each other simultaneously. And here's the reason why. At the end of the day, when those institutions are controlled by those who have the most power, the power elite, they build the education system, the economic system, to maintain the status quo. So that when you go to school, you're taught to take a freaking multiple choice test. Are you serious? So you're going to take a test to see how well you can match my brain? Well, you can't match my brain. If you wrote a test from your brain, I couldn't match yours either. Right? So what we do is we construct this education system based upon multiple choice so that we can figure out what the fixed answer is. But while we're doing that, while we're learning how to be a conformist to a system that we never created, where ethnicity is regarded as something that is real, when in fact the shared history is real, but the definitions that we give to it are socially constructed. That's your symbolic interactionism. So here's what you have. When you have all these things going on, it limits life opportunities. Our job, my job, look, I can give you a textbook and have you memorize all the terms. I can give you all the terms. Assimilation, all these different types of things, segregation, de facto segregation, de jure segregation. That's all good. I can give you a test on it and you can take it. But at the end of the day, when you're my age and Booney's age, you're going to have to be an entrepreneur because the labor force today is then, in 30 years, is going to be a lot different than it is today. If we're teaching you how to think like me instead of think like yourself, your ability to adapt to the changing environment is going to be very low. So if you can't ask critical questions of the things that are in front of you, then you're easily exploitable. And here's what happens. You have to end up selling yourself to the labor force so that those who own and control the labor force will pay you less than what you're worth so they can generate more profit. So while you're generating profit for them, in the meantime, because of ethnic distancing, right, because of ethnic exploitation, those persons who are a minority are exploited for those who have the power. And by the way, it's not whites who particularly have power. It is those who have wealth, the ones that can control the nature of the law, the ones that can force and control the direction of education, the ones who can force and control the direction that the media takes. Those are the persons who have the power to define it. Not me. I don't have that kind of power. All I can do is say, hey, be a critical thinker. Now watch this. Now watch this. If you become a critical thinker and you design your education like this, when you take a class, if you make that class relevant to what you want to have happen in your life, right? It's good to know all these different things. You should know biology and math. I think we overextend that we shouldn't like math, but let me tell you what, math is beautiful because if you learn how to invest your money, if you learn how to get your life insurance and build your financial house, which is a mathematical house, you will have financial independence where other people can't dictate to you how you should behave, where you should behave, and how you have to sell yourself into the system. So why don't we teach you entrepreneurial skills? If we're worried about violent crime, for real, why are we teaching you conflict management skills from kindergarten all the way through until you graduate? Why isn't that a part of the curriculum, right? Why aren't the ideas of building your own business, building your own team, not just building your team with people who are similar-minded, who believe in you, that you believe in, and teaching us to have the strength and the veracity to kick those people off that can't stand on our team? Why don't we talk that? Why? Because we need you to be sellable. And if we can take these arbitrary distinctions on ethnicity and race and social class and gender and sexuality, and we can take all these things and divide us, the more divided we become, the easier it is to exploit us. So multi-ethnicity really has a lot to do with how we define boundaries between groups. That's some heavy stuff, baby. If we say that it is designed to benefit the wealthy at the hands of the poor or the working class, that's your conflict perspective. That's what that is. It's conflict theory based upon Karl Marx. If, however, we make the assumption that we create these rules and we have policing in place so that we can maintain stability and order in society, then we say it's functional for society. And we can also say that when we have rebellion, or riots or whatever it is, if it shows us where on the margins things are breaking down, then we know we can reevaluate the institutions to create stability. If you believe that it is positive, not positive in the sense that people die, but positive in the sense that it clarifies moral boundaries and the things that we need to fix so that we can bring things back into homeostasis, in other words, stability. If we believe that, then we're functionalists. However, if we believe it's all symbolic and that it just represents systems of stereotypes, then we're symbolic interactionists, right? Because symbolic interactionists are saying essentially that you and I create the world based upon symbolic interaction. In other words, we take symbols, we take norms, and we act as if they're real. And what we do is we negotiate their reality so that we can have some kind of cooperation so that we can maintain stability in everyday life. Who we are, what we are, I can't get into all that. Who we are and what we are, I'm going to come back to that in a second, Booney, is who we are is ourself. That is, how do we imagine other people see us? What we are is how we see ourselves. So our identity, what we are, and ourself, what we believe others see. Our whole life is designed to pursue bringing those together. But if we're taught that who we are is in conflict with others who are much like ourselves, our identity is always shaken and our sense of self is always rattled, so that we can never become one full person. And without that, you can never have full peace of mind, and you can never have a complete quality of life that you should have. Exactly, Boone. That's exactly that. Well, I won't say necessarily they don't care about us, but what they do care about, I think, is maintaining their social position, right? I mean, if I were a politician, I certainly would try to generate, policies that would support my constituency, my family, and my friends, right? And I think that it's called social theory. There's in political thought and political science, there's a theory called social theory, which is essentially people who are like situation associate with people who are like situated, and they try to create policies so that people who are like situated will flourish. And I think in that way, the inequality perpetuates itself, maybe not because it's conscious that they don't like us, but maybe it's because they like themselves and it just so happens the policies hurt us. Now, Booney's perspective is that maybe they don't care about us. Right now, that's definitely a conflict perspective. They don't care about us because all they want to do is exploit us. That's conflict theory, right? Now, I'm with him on this one. You can control your destiny. And ethnicity, oh my God, this is the beauty of our neighborhood. Ethnic diversity, man, it is some of the most beautiful thing there is. I mean, me, Booney, Clarence, Carter, Damasio Cifuentes, we were like, man, the four of us were inseparable when we played for Oakdale. And we didn't see race and we didn't see ethnicity. We just didn't, because Bertha had taught us never hate, never judge, right? If you build your team with people who respect you and love you and raise you up, and you don't let people on your team who break you down, abuse you, and exploit you, right? Your team working together can raise you up. It is almost impossible to do it on your own. Because at some point you're going to be sad, at some point you're going to need money, at some point you're going to need love, at some point you're going to need affection, at some point you're going to need opportunity. And the people who are on your team are resources, they're network resources to take you to a different place. Just like you're their network resource, right? So if we look at ourselves as a network resource, right? Remember, it goes from society, opportunity, structure, social networks. If you think of yourself as embedded in society through your social networks, the resources that you have to fulfill your opportunity, your destiny, is based upon the nature of the relationships that you maintain. My Mama Green's great niece, Sonia Hamilton, she and I have been talking. Sonia's beautiful. She's a wonderful human being. She talks about how Mama Green's brother, Uncle Arrell, her grandfather Arrell, used to talk about crabs in a bucket, right? If you put a bunch of crabs in a bucket, you don't have to worry about putting a lid on it, because as soon as the crab starts to crawl out of the bucket, another crab is going to grab it and pull it back in. So every time a crab tries to get out of the bucket, the other crabs will pull it back in. So basically, if you're associating with a bunch of crabs that are going to pull you back in the bucket, your opportunity to get out of the bucket are going to be minimized. So your job is, even especially across ethnic lines, your job is to bring into association those persons who respect you, those persons who love you, and those persons who are going to hold you up. You do that enough times in enough consecutive days, you won't have to be exploited by other people, because you can create your own path. You can create your own business. You can create your own company. You can match your skills, your passions, and your talents to what is available in structural terms, and live every dream that you have. My best friend here in Miami, her name is Annette Perez. Annette works at Primerica, and she is 1 month away from becoming a regional vice president. Now, I don't know if you know what that means, but that means she owns her own business. Took her 2 years to build this business, and she hustled and she worked and she built this great team. We're financial service advisors together. And now she's living on the cusp of her dream. And you want to know why? Because she built her teams with people who loved her, people who respected her, and people who shared a vision. Now she's going to live her dream, right? Is that good for me? Yeah, it's good for me. Because now all of a sudden, across this ethnic line, we are partners, we're brothers, we're brother, sister, we're best friends. And so now she has a resource to help me to get to RVP. You see, when we work as a team out of love, and we have hope as our base to build from, these stereotypes and controlling images tied to race and ethnicity, class and gender and sexual preference and country of origin lose their meaning. But as long as they have their meaning, they're designed to prevent individuals like yourself from obtaining the destiny that you deserve. I think this is all very complex. You know what? It's a little bit hot in my little studio here. But I'm going to go ahead and go with Booney on this one. If we can stand together, if we can share together, our voices can be heard. And we can break down the boundaries, the common sense boundaries that separate us and keep us apart. We do that, we always have the opportunity to live in a better world. Let me go back to the assignment that's due Sunday. All I want you to do is watch a movie that has to do with race and ethnicity. All right? Then I want you to take the theory that you think is most interesting, because you're supposed to look it up already, and it's either conflict theory, functionalist theory, or symbolic interaction, and apply that to the movie. Megan, I believe it was. I think it was Megan. You're not going to describe the whole movie, but you're going to describe. Well, wait, let me rephrase that. You're going to analyze a component of the movie. So, if there's an issue pertaining to ethnicity in education, or ethnicity in, she said, foster care, ethnicity and quality of life, ethnicity and health, doesn't matter what it is. You pull that topic out, and you frame it conceptually like I did in that little movie, How to Write a Great Paper. That introduction to that paper is nothing more than a conceptual introduction. The concepts that you can use are on the sheet that I put in Blackboard that you can pull from. So you use those concepts to frame your introduction, then you do your background, you pick your theory, your data in this case is going to be the movie. So the data is going to be the movie, that's your data section, it's a case study if you want to get technical. And then the analysis is to take the movie and tie it back to the theory, and then draw your conclusions. You do that, oh man, let's see. She hustled, she worked, she got educated on what she needed to make her passion come true. Yeah, not roots, That thing's very long. Yeah, I was thinking roots. Well, you know what? You can look at it in whatever. Ironically, I didn't know I was going to talk about that. I've never talked about this in class. You know how I did the diagram in the movie, how to brainstorm to come up with a topic on a paper. One of the things I do with my own personal life is I do what is called a mind map. And the mind map I have is to climb a tree to the peak, which is abundance. And when I first started, I was under the ground. This is 15, 20 years ago. And I built a ladder climbing up the tree. And in that ladder, each rung was a person. One who would give me financial resources, one emotional support, one friendship support, etc. And Booney's actually on the friendship support, right? But it was interesting that I drew a tree where the roots held up my pursuit of abundance. You know, and I don't mean to get all preachy, but I'm going to get preachy for just a second. You live in the most challenging era in human history with the technological changes, globalization, political, socio-political climate. But you also live in the period and era of the greatest opportunity. If I can give you a piece of advice, maybe 3 pieces. 1, be a lifelong learner. Never stop reading and learning about the world you live in. Never stop reading and learning about that thing that wakes you up in the morning, that passion that burns within you. Never stop. You got to do that for the rest of your life. 2, align your passions and your skills with the trends that are coming down the road. Because if you can align yourself with the trends that are coming down the road and you continue to read, you're going to be one of the top 5% because you're doing what the other people won't do. If you do what others won't do, you will have things that others will never have. And 3, your job is really simple. And that is to live a life of love. That is love of God, if that's what you choose. You don't have to choose it, that's me. Love of self and love of other. If you look in that mirror every day and you say, I like you, I love you, and you're worthy of your dreams, and you start to believe it, you'll find yourself building your team and rising up. And at the end of the day, and Booney can attest to this too, because his daughter has done spectacularly well, especially if you know where he and I came from, right? My daughters are doing really well, especially in light of where we came from, right? But here's the beauty. By the time you get to my age and Booney's age, Booney's not 55, he's 54, he turns in, I think, August. When you get to our age, if you execute these little things that we're talking about, I can basically guarantee you that when you're my age, you will live a life of freedom. And one of the things I'm going to teach you, I'm going to do a video next week. I might do a live feed, I'm not sure, maybe the week after, but I'm going to do a video on how to invest your money, how to build your financial house. Because when you're 54, you really want to be in control of your financial house, especially since there's no way for you to know what the labor force is going to look like. No way for you to know. So let's do that. Let's look at boundaries as something that we can address, understand, eliminate, because that conflict is unnecessary. When, like C. Wright Mills says, we're more similar than we are different, because social problems are forced upon us where our own personal ills, our own personal feelings are actually shaped by external forces. Therefore, your personal ills are very similar to my personal ills. They're externally shaped as from social problems. And at the end, I want you to live a life of fulfillment. I want every one of my students to be one of the top 5%ers. It takes effort, it takes desire, and it takes that critical questioning mind. If you do that every day, it was Mama Green and Irma Jean, for sure. Okay. Sorry, Megan. Mama Green told me real simple. Never hate and never judge. And never judge unless you walked in the shoes of another man, and you, my boy, my baby, have never walked in the shoes of another human being. And Booney will know that, and Booney knows this for a fact. I don't hate. I don't see any of these differences. I've never been able to. Because she taught me. Never hate, never judge. Unless you've walked in the shoes of another, and you have never walked in the shoes of another. It's very powerful. And I think that if we learn how to socialize our kids to see from that perspective, we can start to address some of these issues that plague us in this particular day. What you mean, Boone? Megan, thank you. Hey, Megan, Stephanie, all of you who came in. Booney, my God, a guest appearance for my best friend, my gosh. He finally got to see me at work, although I'm a little bit better when I stand up and move around. Well, Booney knows how I am. He's been knowing me for a long time. Booney, thanks for joining us. And you all, hey, I'm very excited to be here. Me too. A lot of it's in Dear Mama. I just want to say thank you. I've had a great semester, and I will guide you through to the end. We're going to make some adjustments. Continue to watch the announcement board. Have a great evening. Have a great night. Text me if you want to. Call me if you want. We'll set up a Zoom. Let's make this thing happen. You have a good night. Booney, thank you for joining us. I'll see you all soon. It was great.